So today's video has one core objective: to go over the common photography mistakes that amateurs are making and also give you some insight into how to fix these problems. My goal with this video is by the end of it, I want you to immediately be able to start improving your photography. So let's talk about it. And big thank you to Professional Photographers of America for sponsoring today's video. Join the community of 35,000 photographers and find equipment insurance and business resources for photographers just like you and me. So before we get into this topic, I want to go over my inspiration for this video. You see, when I was a kid and a teenager, photography was a hobby for me. And then when I graduated college, I started taking it seriously, and it's led me to this 10-year career that I have now. And over the last 10 years, I've analyzed my own photography, reflected on my journey, studied other photographers, especially the greats. I've worked with other photographers, and in the last couple years I've even coached other photographers on how to improve their images. And through all this analyzation, I noticed an interesting pattern. We're all making the same mistakes. Like when I work with coaching students, everyone has the same problems. And once you correct these problems, your photography all of a sudden starts to improve and improve quickly. So the first reason your photography might come off a little bit amateur is simply due to the fact that you're not going out to shoot enough. I know that's very basic, but I had to include it in the video because it's the foundation of a video like this. If you want to get better at anything, whether it's skateboarding, basketball, or photography, you need to give yourself opportunities to apply the knowledge that you're gaining. So if you watch a video like this and go out to make photography once every single month, yeah, you might improve month to month, but your growth will accelerate so much faster if you go out to shoot every single week or multiple times a week. When I was first starting photography, I would get out every single day between my college classes, and most of the photos were terrible, but it allowed me to improve my skills at an accelerated pace. Now, the second reason your photography may come off a little bit amateur is probably the biggest one in this video, and that is the fact that you're ignoring the rule of 3 in photography. Now, the most basic rule of 3 in photography is the rule of thirds. It's the basic composition that everyone learns when they start out with photography. It's why all your cameras have the potential for a grid. But this rule of 3 applies to other areas of photography as well. You see, the rule of 3 is based on the core elements that make up a photograph. Visually speaking, when someone looks at your photography and they say, wow, that's an interesting photo, they're saying this because your photography incorporates a foreground, midground, and background. And typically, great photos have interesting things happening in each one of these layers. Look at this example right here. When I was out hiking one day, I made this photo of these lead lines. That is our foreground, something happening in front of our subject that lead us to our subject, someone walking up this hill, and then our background is just this blue sky. Now, in this example, our background is lacking a little bit, but I think the foreground is so strong that we're okay. But think about if we removed any of the elements from this photo. If we remove the foreground and just have an image of someone walking up a hill with a blue background, it's not going to be very interesting. If we remove the person walking through our frame, we have a photo that just is some lead lines on the ground and a blue sky. It's not very interesting. But because we have 3 elements at play here, the photo is much more pleasurable to view. Here's another example of obvious layers. Notice how the car is our subject. I really liked this scene when I saw it, but strategically I knew I needed something in the foreground to create some framing and layers in this shot. So I intentionally put the fence in this photo as a foreground, then we have this car and building in our midground, and then our background sets the scene for us, gives this photo some context. This was in Zion National Park, so we have this blue sky with this giant mountain in the background. Now, if I was going to improve this image, I would have shot it at sunset to have that backdrop be a little bit more interesting, but once again, I feel like this photo works because we have all 3 layers there. Because we didn't neglect these layers, at least there's 3 dimensions to our image. Now, here's where things get a little bit more nuanced in this rule of 3. Not every single photo is going to have a background per se. So if that happens to you, you want to think as a photographer, how do I get 3 points of interest in my photograph? This is a great example of this right here. Both of these images would be relatively boring if I didn't photograph them with these 3 points of interest in mind. So this bottom photo of this truck, there is no clear background here, but we have this truck that's an interesting color. That blue is considered a point of interest for me. We also have these tail lights that I think are interesting and look cool. That's another point of interest. So intentionally, when I made this photo, I put that pole in the left side of our frame. Even though it's not the most interesting thing ever, visually it's another element added to the photo. So now we have 3 elements creating layers and depth in our shot, and it's just a little little bit more interesting and compelling versus a photo simply of a truck taillight. The mistake so many amateur photographers make is not thinking in this rule of 3. They're not intentional about trying to add at least 3 points of interest into their photograph. If you want to be a good photographer, you have to think. You have to be intentional about how you're composing photos, because that is at the core of what photography is about. It's not just about capturing something that's interesting, it's about taking the world around you and turning it into art. One more final example of this is this photo from New York. In this image, we have this awesome diner sign, which is the main thing that I wanted to photograph. To make this photo more interesting though, I intentionally waited for someone to come through the frame. That gives us a second point of interest. And then I intentionally composed this photo behind a car, so this way I could get some reflections as well as framing and create another layer in our image. So now we have a foreground layer being the car, our point of interest number 1. We have our subject walking through our frame, point of interest number 2, and we have this awesome diner sign, our background, point of interest number 3. So the goal in photography is to think in terms of 3. Now, you might find yourself in scenarios where you have more than 3 points of interest. If that happens, that's completely fine, but you want to avoid images that only have 1 or 2 points of interest. So before we continue on with this information, I briefly want to thank today's sponsor, Professional Photographers of America, also known as PPA. You see, one mistake that a lot of amateur photographers make, including myself, is not having any equipment insurance for the gear they're investing their money into. And I know early on in my career, I was pinching pennies to be able to afford new camera gear. And unfortunately, on one shoot, I've told this story before, I dropped an 85mm lens, it broke, and at the time, it was pretty devastating because I had no way to replace it. Now, as a member of PPA, I have up to $15,000 of gear insurance at a low monthly price. And PPA also has full gear replacement options with a flat $350 deductible. And PPA also offers data recovery services, so if you are like me early in my career and you had all of your photos on these hard drives that weren't the most reliable, if one of those hard drives ever crashes, PPA can help you get all your valuable work back. And on top of all that, PPA has really cool resources for your business. They have things like cancellation letters and model release forms that you can download directly from PPA. So I definitely recommend checking out everything PPA has to offer, and they're hooking up the channel with a special discount. Just go to the link in the description down below to check it out for yourself. Whether you're just starting out and you're looking to insure your gear, or you're a professional who's looking to take your business to the next level, PPA, also known as Professional Photographers of America, is where you need to be. Now, the third reason your photography may come off a little bit amateur is the fact that you're not looking for natural frames when you're out making your pictures. Now, I just got done talking about the importance of intention with your photography. Now, when you're out making photos, one mindset you can have is looking for different ways to frame subjects in your photograph. These frames, even though they might not be interesting as a foreground, allow for a composition that has more depth to it. So here's a few examples in my own work of frames that I've found. This first one is the most basic example. It's a street photo. I think it was on 4th of July. I just thought it was so interesting that this person had this USA umbrella with this whole USA fit. So I intentionally captured this photo with this frame around them, so there was just another visual element to our shot. This next example is in a stairwell. I noticed how beautiful the city looked on this particular night, and I thought to myself, what can I do to capture this? So I intentionally put the buildings, our midground, in different sections of this grid window that was present. Now, this window in this photo acts essentially as our foreground, and our midground is this city, but because I intentionally framed different elements of the city that I thought were the most important piece of the foreground in these different spots on the grid, the image is much more easy to read. It points the viewer's eye to the elements of the city that stood out on this particular night. This next example is a very basic example of a frame. I was in a subway station and noticed this nice cutout, so all I did was wait for someone to come down the escalator, create this silhouette, and boom, your eye goes straight to the silhouette with these other layers in our composition. And this final image is a more advanced street photo, but notice how I intentionally put the two subjects walking through this scene as silhouettes in this square. I knew that the street was creating this square box, and I knew if I got the right angle, I'd be able to have essentially these silhouettes framed up by this crosswalk. And that's exactly what I did. And on top of that, we have this nice arrow on the street sign pointing us to our subject, essentially saying, hey, pay attention to this. That is the goal with natural framing, to help the person viewing your photo understand what they should be paying attention to. Now, the fourth reason why your photography may come off a little bit amateur is because you're not incorporating more advanced composition compositional elements into your work. Now, composition is important because composition creates a photograph that is readable and easy to understand. Composition takes the world around you and turns it into art and an interesting photograph. Composition is what people are talking about when they say you have the eye of a photographer. One of my personal favorite advanced compositions is lead lines. Lead lines essentially take all the elements of your photo and you create lines to point people to the subject that they should be paying attention to. Look at all of these examples right here. You can see how lead lines and lines in our photograph are sending your eye to the subject. Now, some even more advanced compositional tools that you can implement are things like diagonals and triangles. This is one that's really difficult to understand and explain. It's just something you have to see and experience for yourself, but I'll do my best to break it down. Diagonals and triangles essentially create images that are more balanced and dynamic by splitting your scene into quadrants. So look at this McLaren photo right here. Imagine this photo with no lines on the pavement and this black spot not being in the bottom right of our photo. The photo would not be as interesting because all you'd have to look at is the car. But because we have these lines going throughout our frame, we're creating these different triangles and sections of our photo. So when you look at it, it feels balanced because everything is where it needs to be and the photo is split up into these different quadrants. This beach photo is another example of that. We have this diagonal line cutting through our frame where the beach meets the land. This line cuts our frame into two sections. So when that line intersects with the horizon of our image, we now have a nice triangle section where our subject is positioned on the beach. Now, something like diagonals and triangles is something I recommend you doing your own research on and also looking into more advanced photography compositions, stuff like the Fibonacci sequence, which is essentially when an image replicates a sequence seen in nature. It's the reason why the Mona Lisa is such a captivating image. For some reason, our eye just understands this because it's natural, and it's the reason why sometimes you look at a photo and say, I don't know why, but that just looks perfect. It's because it might follow this pattern that essentially is perfect. It represents perfect balance. So get out, do some of your own photography composition research. Personally, for me, if I'm being honest, a lot of this comes naturally to me. So if you're someone who struggles, I definitely recommend diving into composition a little bit more. Now, the fifth reason why your photography may come off a little bit amateur is because you are not retouching and masking your images. Now, masking an image is in post-processing, going in and essentially adding or taking away light or color to certain parts of your image. Now, this is something that a lot of people look at as extra. They think it's something that is strictly with digital photography, but this existed back in the film days as well. When you research classic black and white film photographers, some of the best out there would dodge and burn different parts of their photo in the darkroom to either add light or take away light from their image. This would create images that were easier to read and more compelling and thus deemed as better by most people because of the extra work put in by the photographer. Now, nowadays you can do this relatively quickly in post-processing, but a lot of people still avoid it. Look at this example right here. This image has no masking applied to it, and this image is after I applied a mask. I went in and made sure I highlighted certain parts of the image that I thought were important. I brought light away from certain parts of the image that I thought were unimportant, and I created an image that is more easy to understand and more readable for the end viewer. Masking is one of those things that takes a little bit of extra time, but when you invest that time, you can almost instantly elevate your photo and bring your image to life. Every single professional out there, the people you follow on Instagram and think, wow, these images are amazing, every single one of them mask their images. I can almost guarantee it. And another thing that all of these photographers do is retouch their photos as well. Look at this example right here. This is before any retouching. Notice all these light reflections happening throughout our scene. It's distracting. It takes away from our subject. When we go in and take all of this away, it is a lot of extra time invested, but by removing all these distracting elements, we now have a photo that is more compelling and more interesting, and it's easier for your viewer to read and understand. At the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of photographers skip this step at an amateur level because they're just kind of lazy. I know I hated editing a photo and then having to sit here and do all this mindless stuff like retouching and masking. But once I started implementing this into my images, I saw an immediate increase in the impact of these photos. With all that out of the way, I promise I'm done now. This was a pretty dense video. If it helps you out, hit the thumbs up button. Like I mentioned, share this with anyone who you think it could help. And if you have any insights into how you improved your own photography and you want to share it with other people, feel free to do that in the comments down below. Y'all are the truth. Big thank you to Professional Photographers of America for sponsoring today's video. Remember, you can go to the link in the description down below to get a special discount on a membership. With that said, I'm out of here. I'll catch y'all in the next one.